On today's Locked On Bucks, we had to look for reasons for optimism for this team. And I think we found it as we are joined by our old friend to get the latest on what he's been up to, his thoughts on the Bucks and the Eastern Conference as a whole as we get to very, very close to the playoffs. So all of that and more coming up on today's Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined today by Camille Davis, by Frank Madden, and by our old friend, Kane Pitman. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, viewable on YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We promised it. We saw the comments all throughout the year, and we finally delivered. It took some time, but that's what happens when you become a megastar and go work for the four-letter network. But joined today by Kane Pitman. So we'll get your thoughts on this Bucks team, as I think we're all a little fatigued on those. But the year so far for you, fill the listeners in on everything you've been going through.
Well, I was thinking about it. Well, it's good to be back, actually. And I know we've been going back and forth on this for a while. It's definitely my fault that it took this long. But I was thinking about it. The last podcast I did, Frank, I'm pretty sure it was post-game on opening night.
Philly.
And the optimism around that podcast, it might have peaked, honestly.
You went out on top.
So,
Kane Pitman. Yeah.
Listen, I'm not going to lie. There's been times where it's gotten a bit low this year. And I've thought to myself, I've got to tune into Locked On Bucks tonight to see how these guys are doing. And I've also thought to myself that I'm pretty glad that I don't have to do this post-game podcast because I would say it's by far been the rockiest season since the Bucks started winning games again. I think we kind of predicted that it might happen, but I don't know. We're entering a pretty weird spot right now, I think.
Yeah, it's one thing to predict it, and it's one thing to actually go through it where you're like, oh, okay, like you mentioned the optimism peaking and then coming out of All-Star break as well, where you're like, okay, look, they're rolling right now. Some big wins there, and then you just follow them up with some stinkers. So, Kane, first off, thank you for coming back even after this current 4-game losing streak that the team is on. Like, that's been one consistent where it's like, okay, the people keep asking for Kane, so I'm happy that we were able to at least do this now during a time period where Bucks fans are a little bit on edge based on what they've been seeing on the court a little bit as well.
Yeah. In fairness, I think most of those people asking for Kane are probably just Kane burners. So, I mean, we haven't done the analysis yet on that, but I have some skepticism. But Kane, I personally am happy to see you back at least.
No, it's good. And if you check the location, there'd be a lot of those comments coming from Connecticut. I think would be the case. So I'm no longer in Australia. I don't know whether we even got to that. I don't think I was allowed to say anything, but I am living in the US. I'm hoping to get to Milwaukee pretty soon in the next few weeks here. If the Bucks make a run, I'm going to be at the Eastern Conference Finals. So Milwaukee, I'm going to need you to pull your finger out and figure this out. But it's been busy. I moved over here. Pretty challenging, I would say, filling out an apartment by myself. I've had to ask a lot of questions and not sure about the in apartment fashion that I've kind of gone with, but it's livable and we're very happy with it. But I am very pleased, by the way, that at 4 p.m. on a Monday afternoon, Frank, you're on the East Coast, so 5 p.m. for us on a Monday, we could get all four of us here on the podcast and the people in the YouTube. So it's good to see some things haven't changed.
Kane, can you give us the quick rundown? So, like, how many shows are you doing? Like, I mean, I follow you on Instagram and you're like pretty active, sort of like showing literally like what you're doing. You're on set. Explain to people like what you're actually doing, and because obviously you're like the face of ESPN's NBA coverage in Australia, basically at this point, right? The roving US based reporter for ESPN, but I guess, are you doing just basketball? What are you what's like sort of your mandate these days for ESPN?
Well, I think a lot of people in Australia don't even know this, and it's kind of weird, but all the Australian broadcasts that they've made in the past, they actually film in Bristol, Connecticut. So they make all the TV for Australia in Bristol. So after a while, they were making all these shows, and I would zoom in and those types of things. And then they were like, they brought me for the playoffs last year. Some people might remember. And then they were doing the coverage, and they were like, hey, it actually like makes sense to have an Australian on our Australian TV shows that we're making specific for the region. So then they moved me over here. So we do 4 or 5 shows a week. A lot of them are NBA pregame shows leading into the broadcasts in Australia. And then we've been doing a lot of travel. I've been going to a bunch of games and mostly just basketball at this point. If things go well for me, they might let me do some other sports, but it's mostly been basketball to this point. But it's busy enough, honestly. We do 5 or 6 days a week, and I'm trying to stick up for the Bucks a little bit because I know when you do see ESPN, I get it. You know, people are like, oh, he's turned, but you know, we're trying to keep a level of realistic commentary around where the team's been this year, but it would have been a lot easier if it was previous years. Let's be honest.
And you're doing your broadcast, and just so people understand, it's like the anchors that you're working with are generally Americans based in Bristol, and then you're also doing, I know during like the finals last year and stuff, like you would do like post game sidelines with all the ESPN big name folks, right? You'd interview whatever, you know, list off like everybody you know from ESPN. But I don't know. I found it very fascinating, just like kind of how all that works. But needless to say, we're proud of you, big guy. I just wish it was easier to see you out doing stuff, but you know, that's the plight of being in America and yet not always being easy to see your stuff, but so it goes.
Well, if things go well, you know, obviously Australia's a pretty small country, you know, so if things go well, you want to progress, and maybe one day they'll let me on the big screen, but we'll
ESPN New Zealand. Next stop, ESPN New Zealand. No, I know you already do New Zealand.
So you never know. We'll see. But it all started Locked On Bucks. Let's give the podcast credit.
Yeah.
So a quick question for you. With that being said, with you doing 5-6 shows a week and your start into all of this, the fandom of the Milwaukee Bucks that led you to making that jump initially, how often are you actually able to catch Bucks games now with having to have a bigger pulse on all other leagues and covering so many other basketball games?
Well, it's been interesting because it's been a long time since I would look at the schedule and go, oh, the Bucks are playing the Grizzlies tonight. I might skip that and watch another game that we might be doing pregame for the next day. That you guys know that's not something you can't possibly do that. But sometimes you gotta choose what games you need to watch for the next day. The one thing that has pissed me off the most about living over here, though, is, and I know that a lot of our friends that are watching this show or listening are going to be able to resonate with this. But when you live in this part of America, I'm blacked out from the Knicks, the Nets, the Celtics, the Sixers, and I found out last week because I hadn't watched 1 second of them all season long. You're blacked out from the damn Washington Wizards as well. So you can't get any of these games. I don't understand. Last night, the Bucks are playing the Knicks. It's on NBA TV. I pay for NBA TV, and I still can't watch it on NBA TV. So I was in the dark to all this. I was watching League Pass in Australia. You get every single game.
So lucky. You're so lucky you didn't have to watch the last week of Bucks basketball.
Well,
man, I would kill to have been blacked out from the last week of Bucks basketball.
Well, everyone says that I'm a good luck charm, or they're going to bring some positivity, but I got some bad news because last night I found a way to get onto my phone on League Pass and get the fourth quarter of Bucks and Knicks. Disappointing.
To say the least.
Very disappointing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those Bucks Grizzlies games and those other types of teams, I mean, those have actually been the more entertaining games because of the Bucks playing to the level of competition. So maybe you need to peruse over the schedule again, although there's none of those left. When you look back at everything you did on Locked On, you mentioned I got my start there, and now look at what you're doing now. What is the one thing, I think we may have touched on it, you don't miss about doing a daily podcast?
Of course not, Frank.
What? No, Frank's pointing to himself for the people out there, and that's not at all accurate. I do have some flashbacks when I listen, though. Although, you know, I'm like, sometimes when I'm driving along, it's nice, Frank, when you're going to get 10 straight minutes of thoughts. And every topic that could be on your mind is going to come up. So it's been very weird actually listening to the podcast, because sometimes I want to jump in and see you guys or say something. But yeah, definitely the thing I haven't missed is last year and over the last 4 or 5 years, the post-game show sometimes became difficult to figure out what you were going to talk about because they were winning a lot and everything was the same. Everything was the same all the time.
We have not had that problem this year.
So in some ways, I feel like this year, even if the results are really annoying you and it's been up and down and it's been really hard to get a grasp of what this team actually is, I don't think that you guys would have been lacking for content. I would say that. It feels like there's been a lot to discuss. And I am curious how vicious the comments have been, though, because I do think that there was times over the last few years, and we all get frustrated when the Bucks lose games, but to me, I was always the one that was like, look, I think some of the reaction is a little bit over the top. Things are pretty good right now if you're a Bucks fan. And now this year it's like, okay, this is what actually happens when things get a little bit rocky and things don't go well. So hopefully everyone's hanging in there. I'll say that.
Oh, they're hanging in there. They are definitely in the comments, hanging in there and voicing their opinions very, very loudly. And we're at the point now with what we've seen where I'm like, if people are saying, hey, the Bucks ain't making it past the first round, I'm looking at the comment like, I can't argue with your opinion. Yeah. There are still some people who are like, I still believe like the Bucks in 6, we won it all. And I'm like, they could. I guess that's a possibility on the table with this team as well if they finally played up to the ceiling that we think. So, yeah, the comments are definitely still commenting. They are active and live as ever. And one that people have been saying, like I mentioned, is that where is Kane? We need Kane. Like maybe he can be like a little good luck, a turning symbol for this team if we can hear Kane on the pod.
Hey, right before a Celtics game. I'm pretty sure we got pregame for the Celtics tomorrow, so I'll be trying to spin some positivity. I think I don't know if you want to get into what the Bucks are doing, but to me, like before the last week of 6 or 7 games, this last little stretch that's obviously been pretty ugly, losing to some pretty terrible teams, I haven't felt too bad about the team. I think some of the chat around the record under Doc Rivers, all that kind of stuff is ridiculous. Like it's just like, okay, well, what's the win-loss under a new coach? Okay, it's Doc Rivers. We want to talk rubbish about him because it's really fun to do for everyone. But they haven't actually been watching, because to me, there's no question that things changed when they did change the coach, in terms of the team looked like they cared a little bit more. They looked like they were coming together. The defense at least looked like it was passable. I think they were around 10th or 11th in defense post All-Star break up until the last 3 or 4 games. So things were way better than I think if you listen nationally, what you would hear. The problem with the last few games is now the team just seems really down on themselves. Mm-hmm. And when you're watching games, it feels like it takes like the slightest thing to go wrong, and everyone's like, well, that's it. And then the team is completely broken. And I'm hoping that if you want to have positivity for the Bucks team, that the Celtics, 2 really important games against the Magic, I think they need to play some good teams, because they need to snap out of it and they need to beat one of those teams to feel better about themselves. Now, the flip side of that is if they don't win many games over the last week, they're going in a really terrible spot. But outside of the way they're playing, they just seem really down on themselves, which is odd, because we haven't seen that too much with these guys that have won a shit ton of games.
I figured the big concern, was, I mean, my whole view was like, look, if you can get to the playoffs second and healthy, then like nothing else like really matters, right? Like all the other noise is just noise. And after last year, I mean, we saw them win freaking 58 games and lose in the first round. Granted, some unique circumstances with the Giannis injury and all that, but I think what you're getting at, Kane, like the idea that they would go in and like basically like have their confidence be like turned into like a burning pyre in the parking lot wasn't really on my radar. Like the idea that they wouldn't finish the season in impressive fashion or something, like of course like that was always sort of in the cards, right? But the idea that they would, lose to like every bad team and just like literally look like they're just sort of out of ideas, right? Was something that I think is what's caught everybody by surprise. And I mean, the fact that they're like still have a chance to get the 2 seed is just a remarkable statement about how bad, especially the Cavaliers have been. I mean, it's pretty crazy, right? Like, and that's probably deflected maybe some of the attention away from how much of a free fall they've been in. But, Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, again, I think like we all knew coming into the season, like no matter what happened during the regular season, especially after what happened last year, that the regular season is kind of window dressing, right? It's all just kind of positioning for what happens in the playoffs. And of course, we're gonna, as fans, like everybody's still gonna live and die with game by game because that's just what fans do, right? And every loss is gonna feel like we've never had it this bad, and wins are gonna feel like like this euphoric thing. But yeah, I think that's what I worry about too, is just like, and Dame kind of alluded to it, but it's just like, I mean, how do you get the joy back? Like Giannis was talking about, right? Like, how do you get the joy back? And it's just like, I mean, I think people might, I mean, I think you could look at some of the games, like the Washington game, and say like, okay, there was some pretty lackadaisical defense, especially in the first half. Like clearly, like there was not a degree of guys being locked in that you would have wanted. But as these games have gone on, I mean, I think you've been able to see like I don't know if panic's the right word, but like they're losing games in the fourth quarter now because I think they're tight and they're nervous and they're feeling pressure, and it's like, why the heck are we not just able to start playing like the team that we know we are? So that's what's scary, because you've only got 4 games, and but I agree. I think playing against good teams, honestly, is probably at this point better than playing against bad teams, just because like at least you're gonna maybe learn something, and if you win, you can actually take something from it, right? Like if you actually beat the Pistons or something, it'd be like, well, now that doesn't really prove anything. So yeah, it's just a very strange spot to be in. And I don't know, I've been thinking back to, last year around Christmas, where they lost 4 straight and 5 of 6. And that included, they lost by 18 in Brooklyn. Then they got blown out on Christmas in Boston. They lost that terrible overtime game in Chicago where Giannis was awesome, and then he just sort of came apart in overtime. And again, they were dealing without Middleton and things like that. But that was only about a week. That started about a week after they had that 40-point loss in Memphis too. So I mean, we've seen it's not completely without precedent that we've seen the Bucks play in the ballpark of this badly, but this close to the playoffs is what really concerns me. And it's just like Giannis with the hamstring thing, and now Chris, like Jesus Christ, like all the stuff that's happened to Chris. It's like, literally they cannot get these guys together for more than a half before something stupid happens, and then you're back at trying to piece together a rotation. And that's obviously, it's kind of, we're getting to it. This team is just so fragile, it feels like, when it comes to rotations and absences. It feels like if Chris, Giannis, and Dame are there, like, okay, let's roll. Anything happens, it's all bets are off.
Well, this is already started to take a very, very dark turn. We'll continue that.
It's Eclipse Day.
It is Eclipse Day. So we'll continue the dark turn as we take a look at the Bucks' final 4 games and those opponents that Kane alluded to, some big ones in the Eastern Conference and the Thunder, and everything else that Frank touched on as this team moves towards the playoffs. We'll get into that conversation coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, if you're searching for a job, you know how difficult it can be to find the right job, and more importantly, to get your name towards the top of the list. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in handy. LinkedIn isn't just another job billboard. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all of that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you use LinkedIn Jobs. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire, so they are constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And we should also remind you, if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to constantly turn down the volume with all the shouting, you should make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's a beautiful ad read while Kane is sitting here.
This is a setup.
It was hilarious.
Shots fired.
Make your own choices, people, but don't,
So that's the big thing is when you look at where this team has been headed this last week is the uncharted part is, this team has lost to bad teams before, and we've seen stretches. This is not the first 4-game losing streak in the Giannis era, or even when the Bucks have been really good. The last time they had a 5-game losing streak was the year that they won an NBA championship. So there's been low points, but all of those had been contained to earlier in the season, or at least early coming out of the All-Star break. I think that's what's the most alarming thing, certainly that we touched on, and it appears with fans as well, is that, wait a minute, I thought that this was what we went through as soon as Doc Rivers started, when you had those 5 games on the road and some other stretches with injuries. So to see this now, as you get some pieces back, is the most frustrating part.
Well, I think I sort of mentioned it earlier, and this was some of the conversations we had before the season even started. When you make a decision to move on from Bud and bring in Griffin, you're opening yourself up that people are going to jump on you the first second they can. So that was always going to be the case. When that doesn't pan out, things got worse. You also made the trade for Dame, and Drew Holiday's playing for the Boston Celtics team that's leading the East by a billion games. So people will be able to jump on that. And then you hire Doc Rivers, who for years has been someone that everyone wanted to jump on. And no matter what he did, they'll be like, wow, he's going to choke in the playoffs. He's not a good coach. So I just think that the Bucks also, they probably are feeling a little bit of pressure of the fact that for the first time ever, there's been no real period of the season where there's been positive news around the Bucks. There just hasn't been, because they might play 2 or 3 games where they look good, and then inevitably they'll play a game where everyone can point to and say, well, they still can't defend. They're old. They're not going to be able to compete in the postseason. So I think they've just gone through a situation where there's been no positive press, which I think if you're a fan also makes you feel pretty negative about the team, because you can't help but read or hear that. I reckon this Bucks team over the last few weeks, they've carried themselves, and there's been a little bit of this through the season. Again, when you look at the defense, they don't seem like a team when they play bad teams that shows up ready to really, really get stuck in and compete and blow away bad teams. They don't look like the energy is there, because when you don't have defenders like the Bucks don't at the guard position, they don't have great defenders. But we've seen that they can defend adequately against good teams, because it feels like as a veteran team, they're like, oh, okay, now we need to show up today and we need to defend to that level. When they played the Thunder game, I tuned in halfway through the third quarter after I finished work, and I think I texted the group with Frank and the guys. I was like, what is this team? What is this defense that we're watching? The first 5 possessions I felt like I watched were all stops, and it was outrageous. So we've seen that they can do it against good teams. And even over the last 6 weeks, they blew out Denver. They had the big win against the Timberwolves out of the All-Star break. They've beaten the Clippers a couple of times in that stretch, one of them without Giannis, which was pretty impressive. So if you are looking for positivity, we've seen when they play good teams that they can play to a level where they're really, really competitive. But it's almost like they carry themselves like they're a team that's on pace for 65 wins, and they don't need to try against bad teams. We've already seen that's clearly not the case, because their defenders at the guard position, if they're not engaged in the game, they're awful. And so we've seen some awful defensive games, like against the Wizards and against Memphis, in games that they just don't look like they even show up to play. They just think they can come out and win. And the guy I feel bad for, honestly, it's probably Giannis's way. He's so down in the dumps, because he brings it every single night, and he's probably not used to playing with a group of guys that aren't able to do it, even when things are bad. So I was trying to figure it out today. Frank, you might know, or Justin, Camille, off the top of your heads, but even if the Bucks win the last few games here, what's the max wins they can get to is 51, right? But I don't think we think they're going to go 4-0. If they do, that would be great. We'd all feel a lot better about it. But
it would be better. I don't know.
Let's say they're 40. Let's say they're 49. Let's go 2-2. If they win 49 games, when was the last time a title winner won fewer than 50 games? I know the Bucks did in 2021, but it was a shorter season, so I don't know if we can count that. So the profile of this team in a conference that everyone says sucks tells you that they're not in the mix to win the title this year. But we've still seen them play to a level that makes you believe if the timing's right and they're playing top level teams every game, maybe that's better for this team to actually be engaged in the game. And that's why, for me, I saw someone in the comments say, would you dodge Philly? I say just run through Philly. I'm not saying you can beat them, but don't bother about dodging that team. Take Philly on, because if you beat them, you put yourself in a position to have a launch pad, feeling good about what you could do the rest of the postseason.
I mean, look, the reality, and we've talked about it a lot too, is we've had people in the comments or people that will call into my show and people that interact with you guys as well on Twitter that talk about strategy for the playoffs and who you should angle to play. I mean, the reality is two things. Number one, especially what the Bucks have done here, you don't have that luxury, first and foremost. You just have to get things right and play better. But also, it's a moot point because of how close everything is. That we know the Celtics are 1. We know the Bulls and Hawks are 9 and 10. We know nothing else. That the Bucks could finish anywhere from 2 to 6. And even those other teams, Philly can get up to 6 and out of the play-in tournament. 5, I think, is as high as they could get. So it's pointless to say, well, if we lose this game and then win the others, we feel like we'll draw this team, because we're probably not going to know anything until the final day of the regular season. So it really is just, look, hopefully Chris Middleton has no more mouth trauma and he can stay on the floor for more than 10 minutes and something doesn't go against him. And you can piece together 4 games where you have most of these guys available.
That's the hope.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, like, I totally agree. Like, give me the highest seed possible to have home court as long as you can have it, such that you're actually still in this playoffs. Because Lord knows I don't trust this team to win on the road consistently, since they've been really bad.
Say to win on the road consistently, or period?
Well, both, yeah. But I mean, the road has been such a slog, right? So, yeah, because it's just like, well, who are you targeting to try, even if you could like pick your opponent, Kane? I think you guys are absolutely right. Like, there's so much congestion. This seems like it's going to go down to the last day, regardless. There's a lot of false precision if you're thinking here that you can just target like one team to play against. I mean, the only upside to me is if you get to a top 2 seed and then one of those lesser 9-10 teams wins a game in the play-in. Like, other than that, I mean, obviously Indiana has not necessarily like figured everything out since acquiring Siakam, and I probably think a lot of that's probably with Halliburton and the kind of injury that he's been nursing. They maybe haven't been the same team as the Bucks had trouble with early in the year. But like, is anybody doing backflips to play Indiana, Miami, Philly? Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, earlier, like a month ago, I would have said like probably Orlando was the team I would have most wanted to face, but now they're staring down the barrel of like beating you to, jumping you in the seating. So, I would agree. Like, I don't, if these guys are going to, if their destiny is to get, mowed down in the first round of the playoffs by some team, then just whatever happens, it's going to happen, And so I agree. Like, if it's Miami, bring it on. I mean, I'm not worried about, especially Miami. On some level, I'm almost hoping for Miami, just because I feel like at least we don't have to worry about motivation after everything that happened last year.
Well, and that was
also Miami might be the one team that like underachieves even more than the Bucks do in the regular season.
That sounds familiar. We were saying that last year.
Yeah,
well, and that was my approach too. Is like, honestly, in a way, I almost want this team to embrace. We want Miami, because you should want to play them after last year.
Worked in 21.
Right, that was the attitude they brought before.
Camille, one thing I don't know, I'm just reading the comments as we're going through. I obviously haven't done this for quite a while. Old and slow seems to be a theme.
Yep.
Daniel Joseph's with that comment there. And
that's also what they said about you and me, Kane, when we were doing the pod together. So,
And what did we do? We just kept plowing on. So that's for the Bucks. You're just going to put your head down and get back to
talk
work.
Longer. Yeah.
It's going to try and tune that out. I don't think that it's that far off the mark, though. To your Frank, Pacers, I don't think is a great matchup. But if the Bucks are going to beat teams, they're going to have to bully them and be physical and be big. That's how they're going to beat teams, and that's why we saw a version of that against the Thunder team that, in theory, could have given them problems, but they were just too big. They were too physical. So, how much enthusiasm, Camille, have you guys had for the young players, particularly Andre Jackson Jr.? Because I'm just curious where you sit on that. In terms of at least the rotations, is there any options in your minds at this point, this late stage in the season?
I mean, that's been the conversation throughout most of the season. I think pretty early on when we heard Adrian Griffin come out and say like, hey, Malik Beasley's going to be our stopper on defense, we were all kind of like, wait a second. Malik Beasley is the guy who we're planning to throw out against all the team's best perimeter players. Like, that's an interesting decision. And as you saw them play, it was like, okay, clearly this team needs an infusion of some athleticism, somebody who can move their feet, stay in front of the ball. Like, if we can get that, we'll love it. So early on, I mean, you're looking at Marjan, you're looking like, hey, let's see if he makes the jump from his rookie year. Let's see what Marjan is looking like after the summer he had with the pro-am runs and everything like that. Like, let's see what he can do. He got some playing time, and then here comes Andre Jackson Jr., and you're like, wow. Like, the athleticism from Andre just jumps off the page. And it seemed like, yes, he makes some mistakes. The shot isn't super consistent at this point. Teams don't respect it. But when you see him in the game, it was just like, okay, he is hustling. He is playing fast. He is making mistakes at full speed. And the only way you get over and through those mistakes is with more playing time. So earlier on, I was definitely like, team, like, let's get Andre Jackson Jr. some minutes. Then as the season continued, you're getting close to the trade deadline, you started seeing some pops of AJ Green. You're like, okay, well, we know he can shoot, but what else? Trade deadline comes. The only move that's made is bringing in Patrick Beverley. And I mentioned myself, I was like, that's it. Like, that's the fix for this team this season is just Patrick Beverley. And he has been a positive for this team, given the fact that he can play some defense, but yet and still, he's an older guy. He's an older vet. And you're looking at the future forecast of the team like, well, who else can show up? And AJ Green has been a real surprise for me. I'm not saying that AJ Green is some lockdown defender or anything like that, but he moves a little bit better defensively than I thought that he would. And when you pair that with his 3-point threat and how quick he gets that shot off and how confident he is in getting that shot off, he was somebody where I was like, okay, like, this might be a player who can be in the rotation, especially when you look at Malik Beasley's contract and the fact that he is somebody here who might not be back next season. So you might be like, hey, we have a spot here at this 2-guard. Who could it be? AJ Green is somebody who separated himself. But then again, like, Andre came in the game recently where you're like, he played with the effort. Like, these are the things that you want to see. So, like, there is some hope, I think, with those young Bucks. But at this point in the season, it's tough to assume that Doc's going to give them a lot of playing time when he's trying to get into his more veteran-led playoff rotation. But I think we have some.
Yeah, you actually did hit on a few things that I was interested in, and I've listened to you guys obviously speak about it. The trade deadline stuff is interesting because we spoke about the attitude of this team, or perhaps at times looking like they're just going through the motions. So when the trade deadline passed, I was like, look, this is probably not the guy that the Bucks wanted to get if they're trying to get a difference maker to win a title. But you talk yourself into it because you're like, well, he might be the personality this team needs on a nightly basis to get them going. And I would still imagine that, depending on health, I don't know how healthy he is, he'll let us know. Pat Bev would have probably some playoff moments, and hopefully the Bucks are in the postseason long enough that he will. I would believe that. And then with the young guys, it's not so much, and Frank, and we've all discussed this a billion times with younger guys. Like, I tweeted about Andre Jackson Jr. the other night in the Toronto game because as soon as he came in the game, that game looked like the Bucks were going to lose by 20 points, 25 points. It was a disaster. And he came in the game, and all of a sudden, he was the guy that sparked everyone. Now, I don't look at that and go, well, Andre Jackson Jr. is the guy that's going to help you in the postseason, because to me, the shocking thing was just the difference of having one guy out there that all of a sudden was just significantly trying harder than everyone else on the floor, the majority of his teammates, obviously, in that situation. So it was more to me stark looking at the other guys and going, well, this is a guy that should be showing you how you can – this Toronto team's no good. They've lost 15 in a row. So to me, that was the biggest difference. I think Andre Jackson Jr. has got a future in the league. I don't think he's an answer right now. But I understand why the fans are frustrated, because they see him and they're like, well, why can't we get close to
exactly
that effort from everyone else? So to me, that's the way I view that, rather than this is some sort of sign that he should play more minutes, because I think at the moment using him as a spark plug is probably the ideal role for him, because you saw after an extended period on the floor, okay, all of a sudden now he shoots a couple threes. One of them should have gone down, but didn't. And it's like, okay, it's going to be challenging for him to be an every night player right now.
Right now, yeah. And that's the big thing is Doc has said from day one that we're going to need at least one of these guys, maybe even two, that are going to have to give us something as we move on through the playoffs. But it's not I think what you were getting at too, it's not like Andre Jackson Jr. is going to become a 20 minutes a game guy or 15 in the playoffs. It's looking for, where do we need this 3-minute burst or 4-minute burst from him that we can really start to swing things? And that point you made too is it's basically verbatim what Doc said after the game is when he was asked about the boost that Andre gave them. Stood out for a lot of reasons, not because he was the best athlete, but because he was playing so hard, and that shouldn't stand out at this level. So even Doc Rivers pointed out, look, this guy looks like he's playing at a different speed with different energy when I put him out there than everybody else. So that's one of the things we have to correct as a team.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get into some more discussion about the playoffs, and I think everybody is chiming in on those teams that they are looking or angling for the Bucks to avoid. But we mentioned a lot on Andre, so I do want to get some takes on the rest of this team. We kind of tiptoed around the defensive changes. Obviously, you've become an offensive team, so we'll get some of Kane's takes on that coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, it is time now to talk to you about Game Time. It can be frustrating buying tickets, especially if you're in a different city and a venue you haven't been to before. That's where Game Time comes in to take away the guesswork and let you know exactly what you're going to be getting and for how much. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices. You can even see the view from your seat. And their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. You can see where you're going to be sitting, what the view is. Is it obstructed? The best part of those flash deals as well, you know you're getting into that building, stadium, arena, whatever it is, at the absolute lowest price with flash and zone deals. Makes it so easy to find your tickets to any MLB game, even if you're in a different city or market. The lowest price guaranteed, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, even. They've got everything that keeps you covered and gives you peace of mind. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, anything you can think of. WWE, if you want to catch the post-WrestleMania hype. Use Game Time to find those deals. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. We mentioned a couple of the other names, and this team recently too. You brought up Kane, the win that they had against the Oklahoma City Thunder, and I think that's what's most confounding about what we've seen is we know there's a very Jekyll and Hyde mix to this team. They play very good against the good teams. I think it's now the third best win percentage in the league against those teams. They've struggled with those middle of the pack teams, but this stretch and this losing streak to come on the heels of doing what they did to the Oklahoma City Thunder, I think is the most perplexing thing that we've seen from this group this season.
Well, I think I've already seen people in the comments. I think everyone's been waiting for a 15-game stretch where Dame goes ballistic, and we've seen parts of it. And I thought in March, I think he was over 40% from three across the whole month, and I thought he was really starting to show signs. So out of all the things that have been disappointing for the Bucks the last few games, and there's been heaps, but to me, it's the fact that Dame is now having a cold stretch again. And I don't know whether him and Giannis, I know there's been so many stories. Eric's done a great job, obviously, covering the team in terms of they were clearly behind the 8 ball when Doc came in. They were clearly well and truly behind the 8 ball. And then they've been playing catch up ever since. And then Giannis has had some health stuff. I still think, and it's not Giannis's fault, clearly it's not Dame's fault either. I just think that it's been harder than they probably thought for them two to play together. And I still see Dame in some games when he's playing by himself, and he looks like he's the most comfortable because he knows that he's going to do absolutely everything. He'll have those 10-plus assist games, and he just looks significantly more comfortable. But the thing that I keep coming back to, and Frank, I think you might have posted some numbers this morning, Middleton still feels like the glue for this team, because even if you have those lineups where Dame and Giannis are out there and they can take over games, but you need someone else. And it's hard to just rely and hope, well, hopefully tonight that Beasley's going to hit 6 threes, because the longer the season's gone, it's felt like they've been coming few and far between. So they need Middleton on the floor. They need him not to get his teeth knocked out. And when he's on the floor, the numbers tell you that the team is just really damn good. But it's nervous times if you're waiting for those guys to be out there. So I don't know. I don't know if you feel the same. To me, the Dame question has been the biggest one all season. I don't buy into the fact that he's too old now or he's washed. I just don't believe that. I just think that it's been a really hard adjustment for him literally to be in a position he's never been in over a decade in the league. And he still just doesn't look that comfortable to me. And he looks his best when he's on the floor by himself.
I think it's pretty confounding that like this lineup data, which I just keep coming back to, right?
Yeah.
And the sample has not grown a lot in the last couple months just because Chris has been out. When you look at kind of either the starting five, which has had the best net rating in the league over the course of the season among kind of major minute 5-man groups, or the trio version of that, which is now just behind the Knicks kind of top trio for the best in the league. But it's kind of funny because it's like all year long, it's been like, well, why aren't Giannis and Dame figuring things out, right? What's going on? Why are they not playing better? And then you look at the numbers and you're like, they got like a 125 offensive rating.
Yeah, great.
It's like
it feels like it's wrong.
Yeah, and that's with like Dame not even like shooting the lights out or being like peak Dame, right? And so I don't know. And that's the other piece of this, which up until this losing streak, I wasn't as worried because the problems, like the offense was really what was stuttering, right? And on the one hand, you can say, well, this is what happens when, you base your offense on playing, well, not base, but when, Malik Beasley playing 30 minutes a game and shooting 45% from 3 is like a thing that you rely on. And then you just keep playing him those minutes, even when he's not doing that. But that doesn't fully explain, the drop off that we've seen offensively. And it's not just that the offense has been worse, but also, I think over the streak, right? It's like the fourth quarter when they need shots, it's just like, they've just like been like, somebody's got a voodoo doll or something that is just preventing them from doing anything dynamic. And everything just feels so hard. Right. And again, like it's going to feel, I think Zach Lowe commented, he's obviously been monitoring the Giannis screening, all year long. And for the most part, everybody's been saying like, you need more and more and more. And then, Zach observed, well, maybe now it's just kind of like, things have gotten a little too stale, right? It's just like too predictable. So again, like it's reps, but I agree. I mean, watching the fourth quarter of that Knicks game, it didn't feel like anything particularly dynamic was happening with Giannis setting screens for Dame. Some of that, obviously, when you've got OG as the defender, right, kind of makes things a little less dynamic. And I'm really curious, hopefully Bucks are healthy for this game on Tuesday against Boston, because certainly, if they put Drew on Giannis, then that's going to be an interesting kind of chess match continuing for how they attack the Celtics, because you can't just run, 800 Giannis Dame pick and rolls, because then it's just, okay, so, all right, now Drew Holiday is guarding Dame Lillard. Congratulations, you forced a switch. So.
Oh, come on.
It had to for the reunion show.
Well, you can blame the Philly internet for that. But I'm sure he's making a very good point. I don't know to that moving forward, because I guess the other part of this, and I don't know how. I'm sure you have discussed the MVP conversation a lot. Camille, where have you guys landed on that? I mean, I've been trying to campaign all season long, and clearly, I don't. Well, I certainly try not to do anything that has some sort of significant bias in it. It looks like Frank's back. But to me, it's difficult to balance this season compared to other seasons for Giannis, just because the teams are really good then. And there's been so many problems and the coaching changes. And there's been, Chris Middleton has felt like he just hasn't been able to get healthy all season long. So I think it's difficult to really balance those. It still feels to me like his best season almost out of since 2019 individually. But then the team also isn't winning enough games. Is that just the talent down the roster? How have you guys seen it? Because to me, it's been a little bizarre how Giannis has kind of been cast to the side in that discussion, when I honestly think if everyone's trashing the Bucks for the coach and the roster and the fact they're old and Dame's not playing well, if anything, that should help his case, particularly when he's got almost identical wins to a bunch of the other guys that are in the conversation there. So I found it a little bit strange. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I thought that his name should have been involved in the conversation a lot more frequently than what it was. And going into All-Star break, I was like, okay, now we know coming out of break, the Bucks are going to have a really difficult schedule to finish the season. If the Bucks can continue strong play that we started seeing with the process looking better under Doc, and that can translate into post All-Star wins, and Giannis continues doing Giannis things, I was like, that should take care of itself with him getting more consideration for that MVP type trophy. But they started strong after the break, and then the losses started. And that piece of it, I was like, okay, that's probably going to wipe Giannis's name out of real serious contention for MVP this season. It was already a difficult road because of the narrative around the Bucks with Adrian Griffin and the firing and the hiring of Adrian Griffin. Whether fair or not, Giannis was assigned a lot of responsibility for that hire, given that it was reported that that was who he wanted. So when things didn't go well, people started to look at it as a slight on Giannis's game as well. You pair that in with the fact that he does have Damian Lillard on his team. So people are like, okay, you got two superstars over here. Like, how does Dame's play affect what Giannis is doing? But on top of it, more than anything, I think that the current losing streak, because Giannis was still top 3, top 4 in a lot of people's minds going into that. But I think with that and the Mavericks starting to win games with Luka playing the way that he's been playing, it really did start to change the conversation, because it was Jokic, it was SGA, it was Giannis. Luka's name was mentioned there, but people kept pointing to record. The Mavericks started winning, which I think combined with the play that Luka had, it just moved Giannis down that list a little bit more as well. So like you said, Giannis has actually had a really good season. And until recently with the hamstring, I mean, he still hasn't missed that many games. Like, he's been playing and the Bucks, you look at it, he's 30 points, over 60% from the field, one of the first players in NBA history to achieve those numbers. So like, it's been a really efficient season for Giannis, even while he's learning how to play with a superstar like Dame on his team. So I thought it was a possibility, but it just didn't seem to pan out with how this team went on to this most recent losing streak.
The first to do it, he's going to be. Yeah. And I think a lot of the points Camille made, is we've talked about it before too, is that he should have been getting more attention than he was. And his name should have been in that conversation a lot more. It's past now because of what the Bucks have done, and the things being held against him, I think, were obviously the coaching nonsense of Giannis hired and fired this guy. The fact that you have Damian Lillard, people are going to look at that and say, well, you can't be the MVP if you have another guy like Dame on your team. And I do think there is a Giannis fatigue, that we're just kind of bored with it. And you can point to Jokic and say, well, why isn't it there? Because Denver's been really good and really consistent this year, and they won a championship last year. So I think those were the challenges that Giannis was up against. He's in a year full of change and up and down play, he has been the constant for the Bucks this season. When we talked about, you see his energy and his effort level on the floor, you see what he's been tasked with taking on defensively versus what he did in years past. And again, the efficiency in what Damian Lillard has helped create for him. So I think he's been as consistent as ever. He has certainly been the most consistent guy on the team this year. But I have, and I'd be curious your thoughts, Frank. I've heard a few more people start to say, Giannis, his numbers aren't actually that good, or we don't think he's quite that good. And I think it was either Zach Lowe or Nate Duncan was talking about this the other day too. I heard from people around the league that thought, the numbers are great, but I don't think he's been as good as he has in years past.
I think some of the frustrating, you look at like the record without him versus without Dame. I mean, some of it's just like a lot of that's just a structural roster construction thing, because, you've got a Bobby Portis behind you that can provide like scoring punch, and, you can bring in Jay Crowder to be more of a floor stretching mobile four behind him. And obviously those guys don't replace Giannis, but, versus Dame, like this roster was constructed without, they were going to go into the training camp with Drew Holiday as the only point guard, which we all were kind of scratching our heads at that all summer. And then, they were only able to add Campaign because opening up the roster spot with the trade. And so that's kind of one of those things that I still don't really fully understand. I'd be curious, to get John Horst, open, honest discussion of why they thought that, because
well, and real quick too, just off of that point, I don't know what to make of it. And when you go back to the Adrian Griffin firing and then the press conferences where they indicated we were prepared to take a step back this year.
Yeah, and I know I've talked with Eric about this. Like, our supposition had been like that they were going to let Andre Jackson just like bring the ball up a lot or something, which, I mean, Andre cannot play point guard in the NBA. Like, he's a good ball handler, but like he can't, and he's a good passer, but he's more of like a, you know, Draymond Green type passer where he's like setting screens, rolling, right? Like, he doesn't know what to do if you give him a screen to go attack the basket. That's like the biggest hole in his game probably. So yeah, that to this day, and obviously they have, you know, limitations on what they could do from a, you know, financial perspective, but I guess we're turning back to just like the kind of Giannis story. I mean, the fact that Giannis, like, on the one hand, he's the metronome, right? Like, he's the baseline. He's always giving you that. And then whether you win or lose depends on whether anyone else like steps up, usually Dame being kind of the swing vote. On the one hand, like, I think that's like part of the argument in his favor, that consistency. But then again, it also felt like he can't carry these second unit lineups. Like, and again, like, you can argue, well, it's not really fair to throw him out there with, you know, a bunch of guys that can barely shoot a little bit and can't dribble and make plays, especially when Chris is hurt. But those lineups have not worked, right? I mean, the lineups when Giannis is out there with the two best players are incredible, and he works pretty well with one of those guys. But when he's the primary ball handler, as much as he's able to do that, for some reason, it just does not, you know, there just is not enough juice, especially offensively, to make those successful. And, you know, I think it's fair to say, like, well, Jokic, you can put, you know, 4 plumbers out there with him, and Denver's like plus 11, right? Like, it's, for whatever reason, you know, like, that just always works. And I think that is a credit to Jokic over Giannis from an offensive standpoint. Obviously, part of the argument is, well, Giannis is also a great defensive player. And I think he's been better defensively this year than he was last year. Been kind of crazy, like, some of his defensive playmaking, even over the last week, like that Grizzlies game, like, looked like he could barely run half the game, but he has 5 blocks, and like, you know, like 3 or 4 of those are just like highlight reel plays. So he's just obviously, you know, I mean, we can't say enough about like how, like, the level that he's at year in and year out. I do think this year is right up there among his best. And, you know, some of the advanced numbers would look better if the team was winning games, right? It's like the first 2 Bud seasons, some of those advanced metrics are juiced a little bit by the fact that the Bucks were a buzzsaw. And I don't think that's because Giannis, you know, it's not like Giannis is like, oh, he's a worse player now, and that's why they're not as good. So I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, like, he's not going to win MVP, and we don't really have any grounds to complain about it because of how the team has responded. So it's become a little bit academic. I wish, you know, we could have a big debate about it, but, you know, I don't know if Eric or Jim Warsawski has the MVP vote this year, but, you know, they can vote for somebody else, and Bucks fans should not give them too much hell, just given the way that kind of the team season has taken out, and also just the level of, you know, in particular Jokic, but to a lesser extent,
actual contenders too. Like, this is not years past where it was just 2 guys. Like, you have 4 to 5 legitimate threats this year,
right? And Luka. I mean, the Mavericks having a better record than the Bucks. I mean, that sucks. Like, that, it felt like you could rely on the Bucks at least being better than the Mavericks, and Luka kind of being like, oh, you and your Jason Kidd-led team, you can just fight for, you know, a play-in spot. But, you know, now, I mean, I guess they're still doing that to some extent, but the record obviously is impressive, especially compared to how the Bucks have faded.
Well, it shouldn't have been if they'd have just rattled off a few wins here in the last week. The other thing that, and it's probably been, I don't know whether it's entertaining or it's frustrating it's probably entertaining for you guys doing a podcast because there's lots to discuss. I was clearly always a Bud guy. I like Bud. I thought he was a good coach. I thought there was a steadiness that the Bucks had for 5 years that you just knew what you were going to get. What you didn't get, though, was you didn't get all that much entertaining content in the press conferences. And as the things have started to go a little bit awry for the Bucks here in the last weeks, you know, Doc's a talker. Mm-hmm. He's a communicator.
Even Griff. I think we've all kind of commented on Eric and Jim and I and others. But yeah, like we'd all even said, man, I'm surprised the Bucks are letting him talk as much as he is, where Griff would go for 15 minutes.
I will say with Griff, and I think we all saw it, it's hard to know if you hire a guy that hasn't been a head coach before, but we've heard with other coaches before, the media stuff can be pretty overwhelming. And there was sometimes there where I just wasn't sure to that point. I was like, I don't know if I'd be saying that, but I wasn't, it might have been just a level of inexperience there. I'm not 100% sure, but Doc knows what's up. But he will just say stuff. And a lot of the times it makes things sound probably worse than what they are. And you're just not used to coaches saying that kind of stuff. So as I said, it's probably been good for Eric and everyone who can write the stories, but it has made things, it feels like we're more aware of things than we have been in the past, particularly when things haven't been going that well. But Frank, you said it, Dame said last night, oh, look, I still feel good. There's still a confidence. That's back to the original point on this whole pod. That's what's been the strange thing for me, is how devoid of confidence they've looked at times. And I still think that if they get those three guys there, they're going to go into a game and they are going to think that they can win. I think these guys have done too much winning to not feel that way. It's just like they need one little, I don't know, one little feel good game to all of a sudden be like, fine, well, okay. I don't know what happened the last week. We've all had shitty weeks where we're down in the dumps. Maybe that's for the Bucks. I don't know. That's the optimistic view.
Well, and we've said it. I mean, we say it all the time, right? This is a daily pod, so like, of course, we're gonna like have to go with the conversation of the day, right? But and we're gonna be kind of like in the weeds because of the frequency with which we do this. But I mean, I say it all the time, right? The season is long. Like it's gonna ebb and flow. Like just look at some of the teams, right? The Clippers. You know. And what happened to the Clippers? Well, shit, like stuff started to kind of come apart for the Clippers. What does that mean? I don't know. We'll see when the playoffs start. Cleveland, what they went 18-2, right?
Yeah.
And then they get key guys back, right? With Garland and Mobley missing a huge part of that. Well, they should be better. How much of that is Donovan Mitchell not being right? I don't know, right? So it's just, you just like cannot, I don't know, you can't extrapolate anything that a team does out very far is basically what it comes down to. And of course, like if you're a play-in team, then that's going to say something versus, if you're the Boston Celtics, like, of course we should read something into that about your relative quality and all that. But especially with these veteran teams, you just don't know. And we saw it. I mean, last year was the negative version of that with the Bucks, like very steady during the regular season, 58 wins. And then, obviously a bad thing happens in playoffs and they just could not respond. And, it's my other favorite phrase, right? Small sample size. That's all the playoffs are. And so, that's the glass half full for this version of the Bucks. Cause certainly everybody's feeling down in the dumps about them. But like you said, Kane, I mean, if they win against Boston on Tuesday or, they beat the Magic twice or win, like if they go 2-2, that would be like, I'd say a big step forward. And I think would restore a lot of, I think some of the confidence that they seem to have been missing here over the past week. And that's what it is, right? Like what I was literally in Philly 2 weeks ago, 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter of that Laker game.
Yeah.
If the Lakers just miss a few shots, what happens thereafter? Mm-hmm. Are we having any of these conversations? Or does the whole vibe carry through and, like they're at 52 wins and all right, like 2 seed, let's go, right? So I don't know. I mean, stuff's on the one hand, things are fragile, I think, especially with this team, but I just hesitate to get like too dismissive or, too confident when we're basing it ultimately off of like a handful of games over the last week, handful of games over the next week, whatever it might be. So yes, of course, there's reason to be skeptical of the Bucks, but there was always reason to be, skeptical. I think about just really hard to do what you're trying to do. The bar is extremely high, but I don't know. At this point, it's just like, like people are saying, I'm done with this team. Like, man, let's see what happens, right? Like,
right.
Those are the people that have probably been saying that for 20 years, right? Like, I get it. There's frustration, but probably the people watching this pod are the kind of people that, may feel those things, but ultimately you come back and, it's because you're talking with your friends about it, whatever it is. Let's give Giannis a chance to prove what he can do. Let's give Dame a chance, Chris a chance. and roll the ball out. And, again, mid-April, let's kind of see what happens. And I don't care who it's against, right? I'm at this point, I just want to see what this team is made of and whether they were worth the hype or worth dismissing or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And the playoffs is the only place we'll see that with this team. It's been a long season, like you mentioned, and it made me think about this conversation that we're having. Made me think about the team early on with Griffin, where he mentioned there's a dark cloud over the team that because we're not winning by enough points, this team, like the vibe around the team, is off. And you think about that in juxtaposition to where this team is at now with this losing streak, and you're hearing Dame being like, "This don't sound weird, but like, I think we're going to be okay." You seeing Bobby like, we just got to fight through it. It's a long season. It's the ups and downs. But ultimately, this is a team that's going to be judged by the playoff performance. Like, that's what it's all about for this Bucks team. Like, that's where the urgency is. And we know it's urgency because, again, they're paying 3 head coaches right now because they're trying their hardest to get back to the playoffs. And I think it was Shaq talking to Dame at All-Star Weekend where he's like, at the end of all of this, it's going to come back down on you, on Giannis, and on Doc. Like, that's what it's going to be looked at because you are the figureheads of this team. You can even throw Chris in there. Like, those are the people where it's like, this is how this team was constructed around Dame, around Chris, around Giannis, and their play. And everyone else around them is put there to fit neatly around what that big 3 can accomplish and what they can do. So the playoffs is where it's going to get really real. And again, we have a sample size to say like, hey, I feel confident about this team heading into the playoffs against better competition where there's no back-to-backs, where, there's a night off or 2 nights off in between games for this team. I feel good about that. But we're not going to know until next week when the playoffs start because this season has, as long as it is, the end of it has come quick. So it's time to really see the playoffs, what the Bucks have in the playoffs.
I think everyone will be excited for the Celtics game as well, even if people are jumping off because of a lot of the reasons we've spoke about. It's felt the mentality hasn't been there. But even the 2 losses against the Celtics, I know for most of those games in Boston, it felt like they were getting handled and they were getting held at arm's length. But the way that those games finished, and we've seen it when the Bucks have won games, and when all of a sudden Dame is knocking down shots from everywhere, this team has had stretches where they look really good. And so if they go out, if they keep playing the way they're playing, then they're going to go out sad in the first round. Mm-hmm. And then I would be very curious to see what comes of that after that in terms of what's going on. Do these guys like each other? Because if that happens, I know that they don't have the defensive capability of players, but they've played too well in little stretches through the year that if they go out in the first round, something's going on. There's something not quite right there. So that's why, hey, if they're older guys and they're like, oh, man, it's like the back end of March and we're going to play the Washington Wizards, I can't be bothered tonight. I don't really blame them for that. You would have thought that they would have been comfortable in that number 2 seed, but if they can't turn it up for Boston tomorrow and then these 2 games against Orlando in the next week or the first round of the playoffs, then, it honestly doesn't really matter at that point.
We hope we don't get there. I mean, if you lose in the first round, I think it's safe to say that everything is on the table for what you do in the offseason, especially considering the constraints that this team is going to be facing with the cap implications. There's no real way to improve. I mean, now is not the time to have the conversation. It's in the offseason, but what do you do with the lineup and how do you add to it? Malik Beasley, you don't own any rights over, and he's been a pretty big piece of your team this year. So it's basically, hey, we hope he can take another veteran minimum with the Rays. Is that's the way you're going to have to round out your roster. So I think that's something else that kind of adds to it and weighs on everyone is they know too the importance of this, and they know just as they did last year, like every time you go into a playoffs and you don't come out victorious, that could be the last time you're together with that group. And I think that can start to weigh on you too. So there's just been a lot that's been going on with this team. It's felt like, I think a lot of us have joked, it's felt like 3 seasons contained into one when you think about going back to the summer too, like everything, the firing of Bud and everything that he was going through off the court, the swing to bring in Damian Lillard, and then the questions about the rest of the roster, and then the Adrian Griffin hiring and the firing and the Joe Prunty 3 games. And then Doc takes over. That even, you look at checkpoints that for the longest time we would all point to, well, since November 3rd, here's what their defense has done. The Bucks have like 10 of those benchmarks this year where there's since November 3rd. There's those 3 games since Joe Prunty took over. There's since Doc Rivers. There's after the All-Star break. And when you got to grasp at straws like that, it just kind of speaks to what do we have here? Like, if we just keep moving those goalposts, what are we taking from this?
Well, my favorite moment, Frank, was the media day photo with a bunch of players that none of them made the roster. Or the introduction, Adrian Griffin introductory press conference.
The Back to the Future picture where Grayson Allen and Javon Carter and Joe Ingles and who else was in that photo that eventually left? Cam Payne wasn't around at that point, but it was ironic. I feel like we joked about it at the time that Grayson and all those people, like, are they really going to even be there by the time the regular season rolls around? And as it turned out, not really. But will be interesting to see kind of what those conversations are next year, because certainly anything short of conference finals, right, will beg a lot of questions about the construction of this roster. And I agree, Justin. Like, I think everything could change. I hope Giannis doesn't ask for a trade. Obviously, that would be the only reason Giannis would ever, be dealt. But even Dame, it's like, people talk about like, oh, Chris and Brooke and all that. It's like, I mean, the only reason you wouldn't think about Dame moving is because either Giannis demands he stay or because he just doesn't have a trade market that is very appealing, right? But as you said, we can leave that for hopefully many weeks from now. Hopefully not like 3 weeks from now.
Hopefully we're not having that early May. Yeah,
exactly. Let's have it later than we had it last year, right? That was just too early to be having that conversation. Especially I was just about to have a baby, Kane, so that was a really annoying time to be having that conversation. But yeah, it is what it is.
I'll say. I know we're gone forever an hour, so we're probably looking to wrap this thing up. But we knew it was going to happen. But I will say one of the saddest things for me, just as someone who loves different players around the league, one of the saddest things, and even as I'm reading the comments, and you see it in Twitter, and trust me, I get it. But the frustration or the turning on Dame for me is just, I think it's a sad storyline because he's been such a likable guy, and this was supposed to be his moment to come to Milwaukee. Now you go on a long playoff run, maybe you win a title. So lots of storylines I'm pulling for, but Dame, big time week here into the postseason, go crazy in the playoffs. That's right near the top of the list for me of potential turnarounds. And look, the Bucks play the Celtics tomorrow tonight, depending on when you're listening to this. And we did do a Bucks Celtics pregame show back before the game in Milwaukee. And one of the last things I said before we sent it over to the game was, I said, look, you got to be realistic. If you've been watching the Bucks over the last week or so here, you probably can't believe that they're going to win this game against a Boston team that's been a juggernaut. Finished the show, jumped in my car, and I got home at about halftime, and the Bucks were up by 35 points. So all I'm saying is we don't know what's going to happen in tomorrow night's game, but hopefully everyone's feeling good about it. And perhaps most importantly, the players are feeling good about it afterwards if they can shake off some of whatever this last week has been.
Just be healthy is the thing for me, is have that group on the floor, as Frank has pointed out the numbers. That's your confidence, and that's hey, I feel like this team can compete with anyone if we have these guys on the floor. So get that. Know the playoffs are a different beast. Hopefully at least 2-2, that you're in a better spot moving into the playoffs. But in terms of the regular season freakouts and overreactions, I think 2021 taught us a lot of that too. 2020, for that matter, when the Bucks were a buzzsaw that was running through teams like the Celtics are doing this year. And we saw how that ended. And in 2021, how quickly we forget. I don't know if the lows were as consistent as we've seen this year, but there was quite a few lows and a lot of start and stop and not linear progression throughout the season. It wasn't really until a couple weeks before the playoffs that you felt like, all right, it's headed in the right direction. And there was that vibe around the team. So it every year is different. And you just hope for health and consistency as we're now a week away from the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think at this point we have an update on the Chris Middleton dental procedure. that
It's a
took
mouth
place.
trauma, Camille,
Mouth-
is how the
yes.
team described it.
Mouth trauma, yes. I don't know if we have any updates with that, but that's been another point that's been disappointing as we wrap up here. Just the lack of playing time we've been able to see with the big three under Doc Rivers. They've only played 8 games together so far under Doc. Really 6 because Chris left 2 of those early with the injury in Phoenix and then with the mouth trauma last night as well. So you're hopeful that at least the last 2 games of the
Those guys,
season,
yeah.
these guys can get some reps in heading into the playoffs. But at this point, who knows what to expect? I'm just hoping for the best. And like we've mentioned, all the other conversations about what will happen if they lose, I would prefer to have those conversations when they actually lose instead of ahead of time and try to just enjoy whatever this ride is that they're taking us on right now.
Chris and Pat Bev are both probable for the game
There you
against the
go.
Celtics. So that's the good news.
I think
Giannis
you
is
should play
questionable.
toothless. Just play toothless. It might be. It might become the good luck charm for the postseason run. Just play without a tooth. If he did lose a tooth, or I don't know what the actual trauma was there, but it doesn't sound good either way. And the other thing I would say, I seen someone comment, the Celtics might not play their starters. I hope they do, because
I think it's early for that. Yeah,
I'm telling you, you want to talk about a loss that could really bring the mood down even more if you lose to the Celtics bench. So I say play the starters, beat them, feel good about yourself, and try and build from there, because let's face it, there's not a lot of time. And it looks like we lost Frank. I don't know if we get to say goodbye to Frank, or do we just say that's the sign that we needed?
I think that's the sign that it wouldn't be a podcast with you and Frank if we didn't have some type of connectivity issues. But speaking of good luck charm, I think everybody is assuming that you are going to be the good luck charm for the Bucks now that you've returned triumphantly to the podcast. They will turn things around, and it'll be a much different postseason run. And as you said, hopefully we'll get to see you covering the Eastern Conference Finals, covering the Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals, I should say.
Yeah, that's right. We're definitely doing the conference finals, so we might do some second round stuff. So hopefully we would be able to do something like this in person. Frank, we'll just ask you to fly in. Don't worry about that. And we'll make it happen. But it's been good. First podcast together since October. So we'll see if we can. Hopefully, there's enough games to knock out a couple more down the road. But it's been fun.
It has been fun. It has been the most requested theme topic on the show for months now. People asking us, and Camille and I joked that we felt like Doc Rivers when he would say Chris Middleton's close, and I know he said that a lot. Like it's close. We think we got him, but we finally delivered it. So that is the story with Kane. Everything that he's been up to now that you haven't heard him on the podcast, and a part of the 4-letter network. He will be covering the Eastern Conference Finals, so now it's up to us to put the Bucks there as well, so we can do one of these live and in person.
Frank, it's great to see you. And we had someone in the comments say that you'd really boosted your lighting, your camera, and your internet. And unfortunately, but look, here's the one thing I would say. This is my last thought for the entire podcast. We've gone for over an hour here, and look, maybe you're frozen again. I might not get Frank to hear this, but we went for an hour and 10 minutes before his internet really had some issues. So I would say credit to Frank.
Yeah.
Credit to Frank. But thanks for having me, guys. I'll definitely be back from time to time. Excellent intro. The ad reads are on point. It's good to know that everything is still running very smoothly over here.
Well, we had some requests too for some specific ad reads for you to do, and some player references, which we can do that when we get to the conference finals.
Sounds like a plan.
So there he is, Kane Pitman. A lot of fun, continued success to everything that you're doing, and hopefully we can deliver the Bucks to the conference finals and do another one of these sometime soon.
We will.
All right, that'll do it for today's mega show. For Frank, for Camille, for Kane, I'm Justin. Thanks to everybody for tuning in and interacting with us throughout the show today. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.